Forget the medieval fantasy tropes. If a 100-ton biological incendiary asset breached modern airspace today, it would not be a sword fight. It would be a catastrophic grid-down event driven by ruthless physics. Fire, total airspace denial, and mass panic create a far more brutal scenario than any Hollywood script. We are treating this threat as a rigorous urban resilience simulation. This is about what happens when an apex aerial predator acts exactly like an AC-130 gunship, deploying a continuous stream of pressurized napalm. Physics always dictates survival downrange, and the physics of a modern city under thermal bombardment are terrifying. You need to understand the mechanics of this collapse before it hits. Listen to the math. A dragon strike does not need to burn every city block to send us back to the Stone Age. It only needs to sever high-voltage transmission lines or incinerate the primary substations. Modern electrical grids operate on incredibly tight tolerances governed by system inertia. When a 1500-degree thermal jet passes over a 500 kilovolt substation, the dielectric mineral oil inside those transformers degrades instantly. The flash point of that oil is around 140 degrees Celsius. At 1500 degrees, it vaporizes in a fraction of a second. This is where the engineering of our subsidized environment becomes a fatal liability. Because that mineral oil is sealed inside a heavy steel casing, the sudden expansion of gas causes a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, a BLEVE. It is a massive, localized thermal detonation. Once a primary substation goes up in a BLEVE, the sudden loss of massive electrical load causes dangerous frequency spikes across the regional network. The North American grid frequency must remain precisely at 60 Hz to function safely. If that frequency deviates by more than half a Hz, under-frequency load-shedding relays automatically trip to protect the massive generators. This is not a slow process. It cascades into regional blackouts within milliseconds. The lights go out instantly. The moment the grid goes down, the clock starts on your municipal water supply. Water distribution does not happen by magic. It relies on high-lift pump stations running on massive electrical currents. The physics of water columns dictate that 1 pound per square inch can lift water about 2.3 feet vertically. To push water to the base of an urban high-rise, the city maintains street-level pressure between 40 and 80 psi. Without grid power, municipal supervisory control and data acquisition systems switch to battery backups. These uninterruptible power supplies are the only thing keeping the valves open. Those municipal backup batteries typically last 2 to 4 hours max. Once that system halts, the high-lift pumps die. The city relies entirely on gravity tanks, and those tanks drain fast. The rate of that drain is proportional to Torricelli's law, meaning as the water level drops, the pressure drops exponentially. For a city of 1 million people consuming 100 million gallons a day, total system depressurization occurs in 4 to 6 hours. T+6 hours after the aerial asset hits the substation, nothing comes out of your faucet. The modern convenience you took for granted becomes your immediate, desperate priority. This is when the first wave of panic sets in. It is not when people see the beast in the sky. It is when they walk to the sink, turn the handle, and hear nothing but air in the pipes. It is when the toilets stop flushing. The psychological realization that the safety net is gone hits harder than the physical threat. Panic in an urban centre is a force multiplier for casualties. People will stampede grocery stores, clog the highways, and abandon secure structures out of sheer terror. In a grid-down scenario with an aerial threat, movement is death. You have to lock down immediately. Most operators think about water in terms of their own thirst. That is the wrong mindset. You do not need a secured water supply just to keep yourself alive. You need it so your child does not look up at you with cracked, bleeding lips asking for a drink that you do not have. Guilt is a much heavier burden than fear, and watching your family suffer because you failed to calculate municipal drain rates will break you long before dehydration does. You secure the logistics downrange so the people you love never have to face the brutal reality of a grid-down environment. That is your primary mission. While you are dealing with the water crisis, the physical environment outside is degrading. Dragon fire at 1500 degrees Celsius bypasses the standard flashover point of a residential room fire. It directly compromises the structural integrity of reinforced concrete through a process called explosive spalling. Concrete naturally retains trapped moisture in its matrix. When ambient heat spikes past 100 degrees rapidly, this water boils into steam. Steam expands to roughly 1,600 times the volume of liquid water. At 1500 degrees, the explosive outward pressure of that steam shatters the concrete from the inside out. When the concrete matrix shatters via explosive spalling, it exposes the inner steel rebar to direct thermal attack. Standard structural steel loses 50% of its yield strength at just 600 degrees Celsius. We are dealing with biological napalm pushing well over double that temperature. The building does not collapse from physical impact from the creature. It collapses from rapid thermal degradation of its tensile strength. Entire high-rises will fold under their own weight, and with municipal fire hydrants sitting at 0 psi, there is absolutely no way for conventional emergency services to cool those structures down. The infrastructure simply melts. By T+12 hours, the hidden casualties begin mounting rapidly. Forget generic insulin shortages for a minute. The immediate killer is the failure of respiratory logistics. Patients relying on oxygen concentrators require a continuous electrical load of 300 to 600 watts. A standard portable solar panel might yield 400 watt-hours per day in optimal conditions. That oxygen concentrator needs 12,000 watt-hours daily. The mathematical impossibility of supporting medical electrical loads via ad hoc solar panels in a smoke-obscured urban environment guarantees a massive mortality rate for oxygen-dependent individuals within the first 48 hours. Hope is not a strategy. Most people guess they have enough food and water to ride out a crisis, but the math says otherwise. When the infrastructure fails, ignorance is lethal. Go to protocolsurvival.com right now, calculate your true survival score, and enroll in our free Catastrophe Survival 101 course. You need to understand the thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, and supply chain math before the sky actually falls. Get the training before you need it, because once the grid goes down, your window to learn these tactics slams shut forever. Secure your knowledge base today. Moving into the lockdown phase, day 1 through 14. In a grid-down scenario, vertical living becomes an immediate death trap. Water stops reaching floors above the 4th level almost instantly due to the loss of head pressure. But thirst is not the thing that is going to drive people out of those expensive penthouse apartments. The more lethal issue is black water stacking. A 40-story residential tower houses roughly 600 people. Under extreme survival stress, they are still generating roughly 6,000 gallons of raw sewage daily. Without electricity, the mechanical ejector pumps in the basement that push that waste into the city mains cease to function. When those lift stations fail, the black water has nowhere to go but up. It backs up through the vertical soil stacks of the building. Within 48 hours, the hydrostatic pressure of raw sewage will breach the lowest available egress points. That means basement levels and first or second floor apartments will literally flood with human waste. It is a biological nightmare. You cannot barricade yourself in a luxury condo when the plumbing turns into a geyser of toxic sludge. This forces a mass vertical migration. Survivors will be trapped between the incendiary threat in the sky and the rising biological hazard pushing up from the ground floors. The friction point is brutal. The danger of black water stacking is not just the mess, it is the chemistry. The anaerobic breakdown of this trapped waste produces hydrogen sulfide gas. Hydrogen sulfide is heavier than air and highly toxic. The insidious part is olfactory fatigue. At just 100 parts per million, you stop smelling the sulfur. Your brain tricks you into thinking the air is clear. But at 500 parts per million, it is rapidly fatal. People taking shelter in basements or sealed lower levels to avoid aerial detection will simply go to sleep and never wake up. The environment itself becomes hostile if you do not understand the standard operating procedures for waste management. To survive the aerial threat, operators will naturally practice extreme light and thermal discipline. You tape the door gaps, you hang blackout curtains, you seal the HVAC vents. You do everything possible to minimize your infrared signature from the sky. But in doing so, you create a fatal closed system thermodynamics problem. A perfectly sealed room is a ticking clock of respiratory math. Let us run the numbers. A standard room is roughly 48,000 litres of air volume. 2 adults at rest exhale about 30 litres of carbon dioxide per hour. The baseline atmospheric CO2 is just 400 parts per million. You have to track how fast that concentration rises. Cognitive impairment begins when CO2 hits 0.5%. Severe danger to life occurs at 3%. To reach 3% in that 48,000 litre room, you need about 1,400 litres of carbon dioxide. At a combined output of 30 litres an hour, it takes exactly 48 hours to hit toxic levels. If you and your partner perfectly seal a master bedroom to hide your thermal signature from the biological asset, you will asphyxiate on your own exhalations in exactly 2 days. You cannot out-prep basic chemistry. You have to engineer a solution that vents the air without breaking your light and thermal discipline. The workaround is baffled ventilation. To maintain CO2 below the safety threshold for 2 humans, you need an air exchange rate of approximately 15 cubic feet per minute. You cut a 4-inch intake vent at the bottom of your space and a 4-inch exhaust vent at the top opposite side. But you cannot leave them open to the sky. You build a 90-degree cardboard baffle over both vents, shaped like an L, and paint the inside matte black. This allows passive convective airflow. The hot, CO2-rich air rises and exhausts out the top, while cold, fresh air pulls in from the bottom. The 90-degree angles achieve 100% light discipline while keeping you breathing. You also need to survive harsh temperature drops without creating an infrared signature. Fire is suicide when an aerial asset is hunting. The solution is a thermodynamics-compliant room within a room. You build a microclimate tent using extruded polystyrene rigid foam board, which has an R value of 5 per inch, and mylar emergency blankets. You construct a cube roughly 2 meters squared. 2 adults generate about 200 watts of thermal energy continuously just by existing. The mylar reflects 97% of that radiated body heat back into the space. The rigid foam delays the conductive heat transfer to the freezing room outside. You stay warm entirely off body heat. With the municipal pressure gone, your only water source is surface harvesting. Rivers, rain runoff, retention ponds. But the urban environment is highly toxic. It will be littered with biological contaminants, heavy metals, and chemical runoff from the structural fires. You cannot simply boil this water. First, boiling consumes massive amounts of fuel you do not have. Second, an open flame creates a massive thermal and visual signature that acts like a beacon for the aerial threat. Boiling is a death sentence in this specific simulation. You have to rely on exact chemical titration to make that scavenged surface water safe for human consumption. The standard prepper advice is to use household bleach. That is a mistake. Liquid bleach degrades by 20% every 6 months. In a protracted grid-down event, your liquid bleach becomes useless salt water. You must use calcium hypochlorite, commonly sold as HTH pool shock, with a minimum of 68% available chlorine. HTH in granular form has a nearly indefinite shelf life if kept dry and sealed. It is the ultimate force multiplier for urban water purification. But it is incredibly concentrated. If you measure it wrong, you will burn your stomach lining and cause internal bleeding. You have to master the dilution math before you ever take a sip. Here is the exact protocol. First, you create a stock solution. You mix exactly 1 heaping teaspoon, roughly 7 grams, of the granular HTH into 2 gallons of water. This creates a highly toxic 500 parts per million chlorine stock solution. Do not drink this stock solution under any circumstances. It is strictly for treating your raw, scavenged water. To disinfect cloudy, highly turbid urban water, you apply a ratio of 1 part stock solution to 100 parts raw water. That means adding about 12.5 ounces of your stock mixture to a 10-gallon container of dirty water. This exact ratio is non-negotiable for safety. Once you mix it, you wait 30 minutes. Do not rush the contact time. The chemical reaction needs time to break down the cellular walls of the bacteria. The resulting water will have approximately 5 parts per million of free chlorine. This is strong enough to absolutely destroy cholera, typhoid, and dysentery pathogens, but mild enough to consume without causing chlorine poisoning. This titration math is the only way your cell survives the rampant waterborne illnesses that inevitably follow an urban infrastructure collapse. Without it, the biological fallout will kill you weeks before the aerial threat even notices you are there. Let us address a major Hollywood myth. The lone wolf surviving with a shotgun and a backpack is a statistical impossibility. Humans are apex predators only when operating in cooperative pack structures. A single human or a small nuclear family attempting to secure a perimeter against desperate neighbours will fail due to pure biological exhaustion. Maintaining a rigid 360-degree security watch requires one person to be fully alert, awake, and armed 24 hours a day. In a military-grade 8-hour shift rotation, providing just one sentry at all times requires a minimum of 4 able-bodied adults. And that is just for standing watch. It does not account for labour. You still have to collect water, dig sanitation trenches, and scavenge for calories. Your nuclear family will burn out in 4 days. To form a sustainable block unit, you have to look at sociology and Dunbar's number. Historical siege data, like the Siege of Sarajevo, proves that informal networks maximize at around 150 people before they fracture into warring factions. The sweet spot for a viable urban survival cell is 15 to 30 individuals. This allows you to pool labour for sentry duty, resource gathering, and medical care without the overhead of massive political infighting. You have to recruit and build your cell before the event happens, not during the panic. While you are organizing your cell, the environment is still burning. We have to talk about fire propagation. With no water pressure, fires spread entirely based on the Stefan Boltzmann law of radiant heat. Radiant heat transfer scales to the 4th power of absolute temperature. Because the dragon fire is burning at 1500 degrees Celsius, it radiates an immense amount of kilowatts per square meter. A localized strike can spontaneously ignite structures up to 50 meters away across an empty street. This creates uncontrollable urban firestorms. Your cell cannot just fortify a building. You must have multiple egress routes planned because your stronghold might spontaneously combust from radiant heat alone. By the end of the 2nd week, total airspace denial means a pure siege economy. All just-in-time diesel logistics are completely halted. Tanker trucks cannot resupply hospitals or grocery stores due to the constant aerial incendiary targeting. The highways are graveyards of melted steel and gridlocked cars. You cannot forage at the local supermarket because it was stripped bare by day 3 and burned to the foundation by day 5. Your 15-person cell is now relying entirely on the calories and equipment you secured prior to the strike. If your math was wrong on your intake requirements, The starvation phase begins now. It is a ruthless numbers game. When the grid goes dark, the cloud goes with it. You cannot Google the hypochlorite ratio or the Stefan-Boltzmann equation when the cell towers are melted. You need a command center that works offline. I built Protocol Survival to be exactly that system. It operates entirely off-grid on your local device. Secure your inventory, track your cell's caloric burn rate, and access your offline training modules right now. Go to protocolsurvival.com while you still have a signal. Download your offline backup today, because tomorrow the bandwidth is gone. Let us pause and address the obvious counter-argument. You might think the National Guard or the military would step in, set up FEMA camps, and restore order within a week. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of this specific threat vector. We are talking about total airspace denial by a highly mobile, armoured biological incendiary platform. Tanker trucks and heavy-lift helicopters cannot resupply military outposts when the sky is actively patrolled by thermal-seeking assets. Any large-scale military convoy becomes an immediate high-value target. The cavalry is not coming. The heavy logistical chain is completely severed, meaning your local survival cell is entirely on its own against the environment. Because the military logistics are severed, another silent threat emerges on a regional scale. Spent nuclear fuel pools at nearby power plants rely strictly on massive diesel generators for their cooling pumps. Once those generators run dry of fuel around day 5, the cooling stops. The decay heat inside those pools generates roughly 10 megawatts of thermal energy. Without cooling water, it begins to boil off. Once the water level drops below the fuel assemblies, you risk zirconium cladding fires and massive radiological release. It is a Fukushima-style station blackout cascade, but entirely induced by airspace denial. The wind direction suddenly becomes just as important as the aerial threat. To survive both the aerial optics and the collapsing environment, human behavioral dynamics will undergo a forced nocturnal shift. Movement during daylight exposes your cell to the biological asset's visual tracking. Therefore, your entire team will sleep during the day, deep underground, and scavenge exclusively at night. However, night introduces a new vulnerability: infrared thermal tracking. A warm human body stands out against cold urban concrete like a flare on thermal optics. You cannot just move around at midnight and think you are safe. You have to time your movements precisely to exploit a loophole in the physics of thermal imaging. This is the only way to scavenge. That loophole is called thermal crossover. Tactical groups must strictly time their scavenging operations during the exact periods just after dawn and just before dusk. During these brief 30 to 45-minute windows, the temperature of the urban terrain rapidly equalizes with the temperature of target objects. The background heat matches your body heat, effectively blinding infrared and thermal optics. It creates a grey-out effect on the sensors. This is your operational window. You push out of your subterranean hide, gather critical resources, and exfiltrate back to the bunker before the thermal contrast returns. Moving outside of thermal crossover is essentially begging to be targeted. Because the primary threat comes from the sky, resource scarcity shifts completely. It is no longer about securing horizontal space or high walls. It is about securing vertical shielding. Top-floor penthouses become literal death traps, entirely exposed to thermal strikes. Basements, subway tunnels, and deep underground parking garages become the highest value real estate in the city. Your cell must shift its operations subterranean. The Earth itself acts as a massive thermal heat sink and physical armour against the incendiary attacks. But living underground requires strict moisture control and sanitation, or the trench foot and fungal infections will cripple your operators before starvation ever sets in. When your scouts push out during thermal crossover, the urban terrain they encounter will be unrecognizable. The concrete will be shattered and pulverized from the thermal degradation we discussed earlier. The streets will be choked with the blackened husks of vehicles. Your standard topographic maps are useless because entire blocks have melted into impassable slag heaps. Your scouts must remap the egress routes nightly, marking dead zones and areas of severe structural instability. A building that looks solid might have lost all its tensile strength and could collapse if the wind shifts. Every step outside the bunker requires slow, methodical testing of the ground. Let us talk about macronutrient anti-decay. Airspace denial means you are stuck with what you have. The generic advice of stockpiling pure rice and beans will literally kill you via micronutrient decay within 60 to 90 days. Survival stress pushes your total daily energy expenditure to roughly 2,800 kilocalories per day. You also have a strict protein limit. To prevent catabolic muscle breakdown while digging trenches and hauling water, you must consume at least 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That is about 60 grams a day for an average adult. If you miss that target, your body begins cannibalizing its own heart muscle. The hidden killer in a long-term siege diet is scurvy. Humans cannot synthesize ascorbic acid. If your vitamin C intake drops below 10 milligrams a day, scurvy sets in. It is an incredibly gruesome way to die. Your connective tissue literally begins to liquefy. Old, healed wounds spontaneously reopen, and your teeth fall out of your gums. You cannot rely on foraging fresh citrus in a burned-out concrete jungle. You have to engineer a solution indoors, without soil and without sunlight. You have to generate vitamin C from dry storage, or your cell will disintegrate from the inside out within 3 months of lockdown. The engineering solution to scurvy is seed sprouting. 100 grams of dry wheat berries contains exactly 0 milligrams of vitamin C. But by soaking those dormant seeds in water for 12 hours and letting them sprout in a dark, damp environment for 3 to 5 days, an incredible enzymatic process occurs. That sprouting action generates 15 to 20 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams of sprouts. It mathematically guarantees scurvy prevention, with absolutely zero reliance on fresh produce logistics or sunlight. This is how you hack your dry storage to provide fresh, life-saving micronutrients deep underground. It is standard operating procedure for long-term isolation. The second micronutrient threat is beriberi, caused by a severe deficiency in vitamin B1, also known as thiamine. Your nervous system requires a minimum of 1.2 milligrams of thiamine daily to function. Without it, you suffer severe neurological degradation, heart failure, and paralysis. You mitigate this by stockpiling whole rolled oats, which hold about 0.6 milligrams per 100 grams. More importantly, never wash your white rice before cooking it in a survival scenario. The thiamine exists strictly in the fine outer hull dust left on the grains. If you wash the rice to make it look clean, you are literally pouring your central nervous system's fuel down the drain. Moving into Phase 4, Day 31 to 100. By month 2, the social contract does not simply erode, it restructures mathematically around absolute scarcity. The weak alliances formed during the initial panic have shattered. The cells that survive this long are hardened, desperate, and strictly territorial. The greatest threat to your cell's existence is no longer just the dragon in the sky. It is the other highly capable human networks operating in the rubble. When localized micro-societies form, they inevitably clash over the remaining water access points and scavenged caches. You have to defend your stronghold against human raiders who are just as hungry and just as tactical as you are. The primary defense mechanism against these human networks is operational security through strategic unimportance. This is often referred to as the grey man building theory. If you board up your exterior windows with fresh plywood, string shiny barbed wire across the perimeter, and post armed guards on the roof, you are making a fatal error. You are signalling to both human raiders and the aerial threat that high-value resources are stored inside. A fortified compound is a target beacon. It invites a siege you cannot win. True security in an urban collapse relies on blending into the devastated baseline. Your stronghold must look utterly worthless from the outside. Successful networks practice camouflaged vulnerability. You purposefully leave the exterior of your building looking completely destroyed and previously looted. You leave the front doors wide open, smashed completely off their hinges. You scatter trash, broken glass and debris all over the front steps and lobby. You make it look like a violent mob already stripped the place down to the copper wiring weeks ago. When a hostile scouting party walks past, they see nothing worth spending calories to investigate. The actual reinforced, airtight perimeter is established deep in the inner hallways or the subterranean levels. It remains completely invisible from the street level and the sky. Once past that ruined facade, the inner perimeter is heavily fortified. This is where your 15-person cell maintains its secure microclimate, water filtration, and defensive choke points. Any hostile force that pushes past the lobby debris immediately walks into a fatal funnel, completely cut off from their own support. You control the angles, the lighting, and the element of surprise. By utilizing strategic unimportance, you conserve massive amounts of ammunition and calories, because 99% of threats simply walk past your building. You only engage when absolutely necessary, and always on your terms, deep inside the structure. It is the ultimate expression of urban evasion and defense. As the months drag on, prolonged medical decay becomes your most persistent enemy. Your stockpile of broad-spectrum antibiotics is not invincible. Medications like amoxicillin and doxycycline degrade rapidly into toxic byproducts when exposed to the high ambient heat of the urban fires and humidity levels over 70%. If you do not store your pharmaceuticals in a strict temperature-controlled environment deep underground, they become useless or actively harmful. A simple laceration from scavenging in the dark can become deeply infected. Without viable antibiotics, that minor cut turns septic, and an operator dies from a localized infection in a matter of days. The environment is actively trying to kill you. Eventually, isolation becomes unsustainable, and you have to interact with other cells. The barter economy that emerges is not based on gold or silver. Precious metals have zero utility when you are starving. The currency of the collapsed city is antibiotics, calcium hypochlorite, and high-density calories. When you engage in trade, you never bring the other faction back to your stronghold. You establish dead drops and neutral zones during the thermal crossover windows. You verify their strength and posture. Trade is fraught with extreme risk. It is a constant Cold War of intelligence gathering. You are always probing their defenses, and they are always probing yours, looking for a moment of weakness. The psychological toll of a nocturnal, subterranean existence cannot be overstated. Humans are deeply diurnal creatures. Forcing your circadian rhythm to completely invert, combined with chronic vitamin D deficiency from a total lack of sunlight, induces severe clinical depression and lethargy. Operators will begin to lose focus. Sentries will fall asleep on watch. Interpersonal conflicts within the cell will violently escalate over minor infractions. Your role as the leader is not just tactical, it is psychological management. You have to enforce strict routines, mandate physical exercise in the bunker, and maintain extreme operational discipline. If the mind breaks, the perimeter falls within hours. By day 100, the city has reached a stark new equilibrium. The aerial incendiary asset has fundamentally rewritten the local ecosystem. Humanity has been violently demoted from the top of the food chain. We are now a prey species, adapting to the exact same evasion tactics used by rodents avoiding hawks. We hide in the dark, we scavenge briefly in the shadows, and we flee at the first sign of a shadow crossing the moon. The arrogance of the subsidized modern era is burned away. Only the hyper-vigilant, mathematically disciplined cells remain. You survive not by fighting the dragon, but by out-engineering its physics. This simulation proves a vital point about preparedness. Surviving the apex predator is not about matching its sheer physical strength. Fiction relies on swords, heroes, and magical interventions. Actual survival relies entirely on your mastery of ruthless physics, fluid mechanics, and thermodynamics. When you strip away the fantasy elements, you realize that the massive systems we rely on every single day are incredibly fragile. We live on a knife's edge, completely dependent on continuous electrical power and complex supply chains. When a chaotic element removes those pillars, the resulting collapse is mathematical, predictable, and utterly indifferent to your feelings. You cannot control the threat, whether it is an EMP, a regional war, or a 100-ton biological incendiary asset descending from the clouds. But you can control your baseline. You can calculate your caloric needs, secure your hypochlorite, and master the logistics of a grid-down environment. You have to step up and become the engineer of your own reality, because no one is coming to save you. Build the systems today so your family can breathe tomorrow. Prepare with purpose, because the grid is not just what keeps the lights on in this world, it is what keeps the monsters out.